All right, today is Wednesday, April 12th, and yesterday you took this practice one, like the first section of this practice one test. So I'm going to go through it with you and go over a couple of things. You have the opportunity while you're doing this to make corrections on the ones you missed and make some notes out to the side so that you can receive more credit on this particular assignment. This is similar to an English language AP exam in which you would have. If you notice up at the top, it tells you that this part consists of selections from prose works and questions on their content, form, and style. After reading each passage, they want you to choose the best answer, which probably is going to hint to you that there is more than one correct answer. And sometimes it's which one is more correct than the other to each question. Notice it also tells you to pay particular attention to the requirements of the questions that include words like not, least, and except. Most of the time on the test, they do put those in bold or in capital letters to bring your attention to that. When you're looking at taking a test, you look at this as an easy way to kind of check off. If it's all of the following except, that means they're all right except for one. Of course, not, you have the same, and then least. So you've got this passage, moving on, question 1 through 13 are based on the following passage from Debtor's Prison, it tells you, which was written by Samuel Johnson in 1758. It's key that you look at who wrote it, in case you know them, but also the time period. 1758 is a long time ago, so there may be some words or phrases that maybe have a different meaning or they're not the same as what we think of today. So you always, if they give you a date and even if they give you a place, it kind of helps you figure out some of the meanings in which go along with that. So you have this letter, and again, it's going to start with, it says, Sir, as I was passing lately under one of the gates of the city, I was struck with horror by a rueful cry, which summoned me to remember the poor debtors. The wisdom and justice of the English laws are by Englishmen at least loudly celebrated, but scarcely the most zealous admirers of our institution can think that law wise, which, when men are capable of work, obliges them to beg, or just, which exposes the liberty of one to the passions of another. The prosperity of a people is proportionate to the number of hands and minds usually employed, and to the community. Sedition is a fever, corruption. Ooh, and I already noticed here, I've got a noun, a linking verb, and another noun. A noun, a linking verb, and then another noun. Idleness, a trophy. So there's a little parallel structure there that I could note, and I noticed that similar syntax of that statement. It says, whatever body and whatever society wastes more than it acquires must gradually decay, and even being that continues to be fed and ceases to labor takes away something from the public stock. So then it goes on, the confinement therefore of any man in the sloth and darkness of a prison is a loss to the nation and no gain to the creditor. So I've got this therefore, like I have made this point. I have a noun, and it's resulting in this kind of equation that any man in the sloth and darkness of a prison is a loss to the nation and no gain to the creditor. And again, I notice that I've got a lot of talk about debt and credit. It says, for the multitudes who are pining in those cells of misery, a very small part is suspected of any fraudulent act by which they retain what belongs to the others. The rest are imprisoned by the wantonness of pride. Ooh, here I have again the magic of 3. 1, 2, 3. I've got pride, revenge, and disappointed expectation. Again, it's some more parallel syntax that I see in this particular sentence. It says, if those who thus rigorously exercise the power which the law has put into their hands be asked why they continue to imprison those whom they know to be unable to pay them, comma, notice I started with an if. I've got a complex sentence here, pretty long, dependent clause leading up to my main sentence. One will answer that his debtor, here I have it again, once lived better than himself. Another than his wife looked above her neighbors, and his children went in silk clothes to the dancing school. And another that he pretended to be a joker and a wit. Some will reply that if they were in debt, they should meet with the same treatment. Got a semicolon here. And then it says some that they owe no more than they can pay and need therefore give no account of their actions. Some will confess their resolution and their debtors shall rot in jail, and some will discover the hope by cruelty to wring payment from their friends. So you've kind of got this listing of some will do this, some will do this, some will do that. So you've got a listing and a little bit of repetition in this particular paragraph. It says, since poverty is punished among us as a crime, it ought to at least to be treated with the same lenity as those other crimes. The offender, okay, so I've got a sense, kind of a result here. If this is punished as a crime, then it should be treated the same as other crimes. Again, a little reasoning going on here. The offender ought not to languish at the will of him whom he has offended, but to be allowed some appeal to the justice of his country. There can be no reason why any debtor should be in prison, but that he may be compelled to payment, and a term should therefore be fixed in which the creditor should exhibit his accusation of concealed property. If such property can be discovered, then let it be given to the creditor. If the charge is not offered or cannot be proved, let the prisoner be dismissed. So again, some scenarios, you've got a lot of ifs, then this, reasoning going on in this particular paragraph. Then it goes on and it says, many of the inhabitants of prison may justly complain of harder treatment. He that once owes more than he can pay is often obliged to bribe his creditor to patience by increasing his debt. Worse and worse commodities at a higher and higher price are forced upon him, and he is impoverished by compulsive traffic and at last overwhelmed in the common receptacles of misery. Ooh, that's a nice image. By debt, which without his own consent were accumulated on his head. To the relief of this distress, no other objection can be made, but that by any easy dissolution of debts, fraud will be left without punishment, and imprudence without awe, and that when insolvency shall be no longer punishable, credit will cease. Again, you've got these long sentences leading to these very simple statements, very absolute, with those simple little be verbs there of the is and the will and the are. It says the motive to credit is the hope of advantage. Commerce can never be at a stop while one man wants what another can supply, and credit will never be denied while it is likely to be repaid with profit. He that trusts one whom he designs to sue is criminal by the act of trust. The cessation of such insidious traffic is to be desired. Ooh, that's another nice vocabulary there. And no reason can be given why a change of the law should impair any other. It says, we see nations trade with nations where no payment can be compelled. Mutual convenience produces mutual confidence, and the merchants continue to satisfy the demands of each other, though they have nothing to dread but the loss of trade. It is vain to continue an institution which experience shows to be ineffectual. We have, and this is nice, if you say it is vain, we have now imprisoned one generation of debtors after another, but we do not find that their numbers lessen. We have now learned that rashness and imprudence will not be deterred from taking credit. Let us try whether fraud and avarice may be more easily restrained from giving up. And I do like how you've got a little bit of that repetition. We have now imprisoned, we have now learned, and then let us do that. So again, nice syntax. There's a lot of parallel structure in here, and there's a strong argument that is to be made. So let's go back and let's look at a couple of these. You should be marking on your text when you go back, and these questions are there. Some of you didn't mark on your text at all. When you're taking the AP language test, you're not going to have enough time to go back and reread and reread and reread. So that first read, you need to go through and you need to mark those particular things that you see. You're not going to catch everything, and you're probably going to mark stuff that there aren't any questions, that necessarily any questions on. But you need to make sure that you're actively marking, because when you mark, it makes you actively read and process a little bit better what the question is. So look at number 1. It tells you here that Johnson finds a current British law unjust and foolish. Yes. And he goes on, in modern terms, if that same law were passed today. So this is pretty much what we would say is like a comprehension question, Basically, did you read it and you understand and can make this connection from this very old, what did we say this was, 1758 to today? So he finds um, this current British law to be foolish. And so now, what if this law were passed today? What would he say? So you've got question 1 that says you could make your bank loan your money from your savings. The government could take your house for taxes. Anything you invented could be used by others to make money. Choice D says you could be sent to jail for failure to pay child support. Or E, a credit card company could put you in jail for failure to pay your bill. So quite simply, when you look at the argument that is being made, you see really all of these first choices may be true statements, but when you're connecting them to what the question is, E is probably your best answer on that one. A credit card company could put you in jail for failure to pay your bill. And you see that he has gone on, talking about obviously credit and debt. So quite simply, and there's really not much in that passage or necessarily that you have to go back and look that up, but you can figure that out based on that one read, that one quick read, because time is of the essence when you take this test, but one quick read showing you that that's the meaning or what you comprehended, and you can make that connection to today. All right, number 2 says Johnson's style demonstrates the use of, okay, this is when you look at literary analysis or you're looking at literary terms, the AP language, when you're looking at argumentative terms, you're looking at knowing what it was that he did. So when you look at your choices there, you see that you have choice A is parallel syntax. Well, I wonder how many times I've marked on here. Ooh, look at that syntax and the parallel and the listing, the magic of 3, saying it over and over again. So I kind of feel like that may be the answer. Rhetorical question. I really didn't see any rhetorical question in there at all. Vivid adjectives and adverbs. He has some nice vocabulary. And there are some description, active present tense verbs, alternating long and short paragraphs. So when I look at my choices, I see that I feel like A, and I'm not saying the other ones aren't there, but that A is your best answer in that. Parallel syntax. He does use vivid language, and here and there there's anger in his description, but it is not as dominant as the parallelism is. So that's a good example of how there are correct answers, but remember you're choosing the best answer. All right, look at number 3. It says in the first paragraph, all of the following contribute to the central tone. Did we work on tone quite a bit with good old Douglas? Yes, you need to know the tone, except, so this is one of those you can check off. And then one is not going to match. They're all going to be there and almost not necessarily synonymous in meaning, but they're synonymous in the tone that is conveyed. And then one is not going to match the rest. Okay? So when you look at, first off, you need to think, okay, what is the tone? When I'm looking in that opening paragraph, let me just start real simple. Is the tone positive or is it negative? I'm going to definitely say that it is not positive. I'm going to start with it's negative in its nature. He's a little frustrated with stuff. I would say you could even say it was like heart-rending if you want to when you look at that. So I'm going to go through, and then I've got to know this. Then it comes down to vocabulary. Because quite simply, if I know what all these words mean, even without reading the passage, I could probably figure out which is positive and which is negative. Gangrene, would I say is positive or negative? Hopefully you know what that is. I'm going to go with that's negative. Zealous, you've got a lot of energy. If you're zealous about something, I would say that's kind of a positive. And if you go back and you look at the way it was used, in line 7, but scarcely the most zealous admirers of our institutions can think, okay? And then I've got corruption, I would definitely say is a negative. This, you look at evil, malign there when you're looking at the root word, and then rueful. So when you see that, every word carries a negative connotation in this list except for the word zealous. So when you're looking at that, you see these negative connotations or definitions or tone when you're looking at it, but zealous in itself does not. Okay? Number 4 says Johnson suggests that he was alerted to this problem by. So when I look at this, I'm going to go back and kind of look in the text and see what was going on. But he was alerted to this problem. That was it by journalists, it says. And again, this is, I wouldn't even call it comprehension. I would say, like, this is go back in the text and find it. Kind of like what you have to do, like, when you're in 2nd grade. So when you look here, you've got by journalists, by government officials, by his tendency to take walks about London, by a lawyer who accosted him on the street, or by family members who came to see him. So when you take a minute, and if you miss this one and want to do correction, you can go back and find where it is. Oh, like here at the beginning, I was passing Langley under one of the gates of the city. I was struck with horror by a rueful cry, the poor debtor. So it goes on. So obviously the answer to this is by his tendency to take walks about London. Number 5, you've got the question of the word atrophy in line 14, most closely, which means there's probably going to be more than one right answer, evokes which, of one of the 7 deadly sins. So I'm going to take a minute and I'm going to go back. And when I look at this, I see whenever it asks you that, you need to go back and you need to read the entire sentence. Sometimes you need to go back and read the sentence before it and the sentence after it. But don't just look at the one word. So you have to the community. And this is where we had that noun linking verb noun. So it is a great little parallel and equality or balance maybe is a better word when you look at that. So I have idleness, and so then I go through, and when I look at this, I'm going to think, okay, so basically he took those 3 different words, compares them to other words. So when I'm looking at that, if you have atrophy too, when you're looking, it pretty much essentially means that you are wasting away from like a disease or something, or not a disease, from not being used, from disuse. Okay? Let me see if I can spell that. D-I-S-U-S-E. Okay? So you are wasting away because of not being used. Like, think about specifically, obviously, the loss of muscle because you don't exercise. And it says, it goes on, which is pretty much what happens within the prison walls. The sin is not the fault of the debtors, but you look at it as being the fault of the system because you can't exercise or do those things. So when you look at that, sloth is going to be, sloth is late. Think of, I know they're all the rage now. Everybody loves a sloth because they're super slow and super cute, but they're not using or maybe moving as quickly as they could. They're kind of weak when you look at that. So atrophy, wasting away from not being used. Think specifically your muscles being wasting away. And when you look at this, it's not the fault, again, he's saying it's not the fault of the debtors, but it's the fault of the system. So looking at those particular things, the way he uses, it's going to be sloth there. Number 6 says the sentence in lines 11 through 12. So I'm always going to go back and look at it. And let's see where it starts. The prosperity of a people is proportionate to the number of hands and minds usually employed. So I go back. Basically says, so it's asking for a basic definition that the debtor's prison commits a double wrong in that it does what? So you go back and you look at that. It's proportionate to the number of hands and minds what does it say? Usefully employed. So, does it deprive the country of its citizens and it fails to return assets to the creditors? Possibly. And does it take away soldiers, encourage idleness, destroy families while it makes banks rich, fail to return assets to creditors and encourage immigration, or make banks rich but the government treasury weak? When I look at that and I think about that sentence, it essentially pretty much is condemning the practice because it takes a hard working people off the street and it incarcerates them. If you think about it later on, he does an entire mathematical calculation of the cost of the country as a whole, and the creditors don't get their money, and the country loses potential employees. So when I look at that, I'm going to go with A as my best answer on that. And I think most of you, for the most part, got that one correct. So good job on that one, because I do think that was kind of a hard question. All right, look at number 7. 7 says, in paragraph 5, Johnson seeks to understand what purpose this law serves. So I'm going to quickly go back. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'm going to remember this paragraph that I read just a minute ago. And it says, he discovers that people answer with all of the following reasons, again, except. So this is one of those I can go through and I can check off when I find it, and then there's going to be one that I don't see. So when I look at this, I go through and I've got the law quashes the pride of those who live better than they. Found that. The law reminds others that they should not commit the crime. I'm not really seeing that. The law punishes the fool. The creditor were in the same boat. He would want to be punished. And the law frequently forces payment from others to get family members and friends out of jail. So all of the following except, when I look at this one, B is your correct answer on that one. And again, you can go back, and what you'll need to go back and mark that in the text. Number 8 says in paragraph 6 that starts, since poverty. So when I look at that, since poverty is punished among us as a crime, it ought to at least be treated the same as other crimes. So that's this paragraph right here that I can go back, and again, you can make corrections as you go. In paragraph 6, Johnson does what? So what is he doing in this? And when I go back and I look at this, I can see, let me find it. This is where I think he gives a solution. Yeah, right here, where he says, if such property can be discovered. So before I even read my choices, and when I'm looking at this, I see that there are some suggestions, or a suggestion, that is being made to kind of fix the current system. So let me then go back and look at my choices. When I look at my choices, I see it offer a retraction of a previous argument. Then, no, I don't think so. B says, outlines a solution to the problem of non-payment. That sounds good. Provides an antithetical argument to his previous argument. That's definitely not it. Sustains his argument with appeal to authority. I didn't really see that. And provides an inductive reflection of the problem. Absolutely, he gives a solution. When you have a sentence that starts with if, and then a comma, and then this like result of this is what's going to happen, if you don't study, comma, you will fail the test. I am giving a solution to whatever this particular problem is. And that sentence there at the end is set up exactly like that to make that happen. Number 9 says the word insidious in line 69 most clearly means. So when I go back and I look there, and I have the word, let me find it, commerce, credit will be denied, which is likely to be, no, where's 65, 6, 7, 8, 9. Here it is. So I'm going to read the whole sentence. He that trusts one whom he designs to sue is criminal by the act of trust. The cessation of such insidious traffic is to be desired, and no reason can be given why a change of the law should impair any other. So I'm thinking about that word. Hopefully I kind of know what that word means, but I might not. But I can First off, tell when I look at it in the sentence, is it positive or negative? Let's just start. Does that sound like a compliment or an insult? And so when I look at these, I'm going to definitely scratch out that, and I'm going to go with it. To me is kind of negative when I'm looking at that particular the connotation that that word gives off. But I also feel like this is a pretty strong word carrying a lot of weight. So when I look at possible answers, I'm going to say that there are probably like 3 negatives. I'm going to go ahead and mark off uninvited as kind of a junk answer is what I would call that. And when I look at, when I like cruel, that's me, dishonest, loathsome. When I'm looking at the weight of the word, I'm going to go directly with loathsome, being when you loathe something, that is a deep, deep-seated hate that you have. Number 10 says in the next to last paragraph, Johnson essentially compares. So I'm going to go back and look at the next to last paragraph that says we see nation trade with nation where no payment can be compelled. Mutual conveniences produce mutual confidence. Okay, so I go back and I reread that particular paragraph, and when I look at it, I'm looking for a comparison. So I'm going to go back and mark those particular things. I can see that when he is talking here, what comparison is being made. I look at, you've got this comparison of the way that countries conduct trade and the current compared to, I'm just going to put the word compared over here. It's kind of backwards. Compared to the current or the local situation. You can't see what I'm writing. The current or local situation of lending money, which is what his whole essay is about. So when I look at, because again I've got the nation of trade or trade with nation, and then I go on, merchants continue to satisfy the demands of each other, although they have nothing to dread but the loss of trade. So I've got a strong comparison there. So when I look at my choices, I've got creditors and debtors, what am I saying? Debtors to trading nations. I think that's it, but I'll keep going. Creditors to merchants and guildsmen, traders to debtors, government, definitely not. No. Okay, so I know that A is my correct answer on number 10. Number 11 says the author's use of we, that pronoun usage is important. They're going to ask you, and you should pay attention to the different ways in which they use the pronoun. The pronoun usage we in the last 2 paragraphs is employed to do what? Now, employed is this awkward word that no one uses except on this test. In other words, it is used to, or why did they use it, is what that is asking. So why is it used? What effect does it have? So I'm going to go back and I look at these last 2 paragraphs, which I do see that shift. I should have marked that the first time I read it, where I'm using this we. And so then I need to think about the antecedent there, or what's the feeling that is connected to that. So when I look at the word we, I know that this is like a plural pronoun. It is a group. It is more than one person when I look at that. So is it like we as a nation, we as this just humanity, or maybe it's just we as, when I think of this, like a community. It is going to include the speaker, Johnson himself. It's going to be debtors, creditors, the government. So it is like a whole social or society problem when I think about that. So when I look at number 11, I look at my best answer to invite the reader to avoid debt and family grief. No. Shift the blame from individuals to the government. No. Acknowledge his own failure to pay his own debts. I don't think so. Or how about recognize the need for a collective solution, because this is a collective problem. It is a group, and shift that focus from himself to the debtors that he represents. Look at number 12. Fundamentally, that's a big basic word for the bottom line. Johnson is seeking legal circumstances that provide for a court hearing where, and so you think about a little bit earlier on in the passage, the best solution, or the one that he offers earlier on, is pretty much, and you can go back in the passage and find this, a trial that's going to determine whether the debtor is, I'm just going to put, is the debtor holding out. Okay? So is this trial that's going to figure out what, if he can pay his debt or not. So when I look at 12, let's see, the debtor either pays his debt or he goes free. If it is proven the debtor has hidden assets, he is made to relinquish, big fancy word, them, probably the answer. The creditor makes a reasonable claim, which is then paid by the family. Or the judge forces a reconciliation and a reasonable payment. And E, the debtor paid all he can, and the British government makes up the difference. So when I look at that, B is my best answer on that one. And then the last question for number 13 says, in a fundamental, here we go again, fundamental way. So in other words, bottom line, what is he saying? In a fundamental way, Johnson finds the whole issue, the old paradox. Remember that a paradox is when you have two things that are opposite. They sound like they contradict, but they hold truth. But you have two things that sound opposite, but the more you think about it, there is a deeper truth in that. This is a hard question, and I think there were several of you who missed this particular question. So let's look at our choices. It tells you which of the following statements most clearly defines that paradox for him as a speaker, not for you or for what you feel, but based on what he said, which one of these lines is going to fulfill this or explain maybe or define that paradox. So you've got the first one that says, we have now imprisoned one generation of debtors after another, but we do not find that their numbers lessen. B says the rest are imprisoned by the wantonness of pride, the malignity of revenge, the acrimony of disappointed expectation. Though that's very nice sentence structure and vocabulary, not the answer. And then he that trusts one whom he designs to sue is criminal by the act of trust. Well, when I read that, I think, that's confusing, which gives me kind of a red flag that might be the paradox, because that's how paradoxes are. D says the confinement, therefore, of any nation in the sloth and darkness of a prison is a loss to the nation and no gain to the creditor. I feel like that's a pretty straightforward statement, not so much contradicting itself. And he that once owes more than he can pay is often obliged to bribe his creditor to patience by increasing his debt. Again, I kind of feel like that's a straightforward statement. So I'm going to go back to that C when I look at it, and I think about, first off, I should notice that this entire passage is ironic. He's a little bit angry. He's a little bit frustrated. Irony is really hard to read and to get. And again, because it's full of, you could say, I guess, irony's has some paradoxes possibly, or contradictions in it, because that's what makes it ironic. So when it's pretty much ironic and irate. Angry, I guess he's irate. And you can see that the paradox is, if one is engaged in the business of making money, then the person would then lock up people who could potentially give him that money. When you look at what Johnson is saying here, he doesn't really see anything in a debtor's prison but cruelty and meanness. When he's looking at this prison, he just sees that negative side. It's mean, it's cruel, it's not really doing anything. There's several potential statements when you look at these answers, but the one that's going to come close to this is that he that trusts one whom he designs to sue is criminal by the act of trust. In other words, trust, or when you think about this, trust is the opposite of let's see, C-R-I-M-I, let's see if I can spell, C-R-I-M-I-N-A-L-I-T-Y. These are opposite of one another when you look at that. And yet, here you find it in union or a jointness together. So Johnson, and he pretty much is furious and finds this deplorable when you look at that. Okay, so this is a pretty deep question. This would be one of those, if you didn't get it when you're looking at time, you need to skip it and move on. Because unless you just really see it, you're going to waste a lot of time on that when you could get some other questions correct. Okay, what I want you to do for the rest of the period is I want you to look at that next passage that you did. I have already marked the ones you missed. I want you to go through, and I think y'all did a little bit better on that one. Go through and maybe pick a different answer for those. And then if you go to Google Classroom, there's going to be, it's called Quiz, and you're going to click on it. And basically all it's going to say, I'm not typing the questions, it's just going to say 15, and then it's going to have an A, B, C, D, or E. And you just click which one of these that you put. You can take it one time, and then you hit submit, okay? So there'll be a quiz, a little quiz form on there. You'll go to Google Classroom, and again, I'm not typing the question. I'm just going to have 15, 16, 17, 18. You pick which answer, and then when you're finished, you submit it, and then we'll continue on with this second part tomorrow.